Hello mga studs, pag-usapan naman natin sa ngayon ang internal control concepts and techniques. Tapos na tayo sa ethics, tapos na tayo sa fraud and fraud schemes, internal controls naman tayo. So, define muna natin ano ba ibig sabihin ng internal control? Okay? Because one of the common definition and more familiar definition of internal control is that it is the organizational plan and all related measures to safeguard assets, ensure the accuracy and reliability of accounting records, promote operational efficiency, and encourage adherence to prescribed managerial policies. So parang sa picture na ito na makikita ninyo, kung ito ang ating mga issues, ito yung ating mga lapses arising from errors or especially yung fraud, ito naman yung ating control. Okay? Kinokontrol natin na maapektuhan yung iba pang mga pwedeng tamaan, Okay? So, internal control is our organizational plan. Now, please take note of this 4, which is also defined here. Okay? Kasi, yung internal control, ito yung mga measures para mapangalagaan natin yung ating mga assets, safeguard assets, no? Ma-make sure na yung ating accounting records tama at maaasahan, okay? Promote operational efficiency. So hindi ibig sabihin pala, hindi lamang po mga financial records ang inaalagaan ng internal control, pero maging yung efficiency and compliance with policies and regulations. Adherence to policies, no? At itong 4 na ito, ito yung tinatawag natin na 4 broad objectives. Okay. Now, dito naman makikita po ninyo sa slide na ito yung ating 4 modifying assumptions. Ano ba yung mga assumptions natin sa internal control? Okay? First, management responsibility. Second, reasonable assurance. Third, methods of data processing. And fourth, limitations. Isa-isahin po natin. Dito muna tayo sa management responsibility. Sino ba kasi ang may responsibilidad sa paggagawa ng internal controls ng ating mga related measures? Walang iba kung hindi yung management. The establishment and hindi lamang pag-establish kung hindi yung maintenance nitong system of internal control is a management responsibility. Because of course, the management is the one in charge, di ba? Especially sabihin na natin yung top management. Sila yung may strategic plan sa organization. So part ng kanilang plan is to set up a internal controls para mapangalagaan natin, ma-safeguard yung assets, yung ating mga financial records tama, meron tayong operational efficiency and compliance to management rules and regulations, no? So that is the management responsibility. Please take note, ano ba ang involvement ng accountant or ng auditor? Yung auditor, hindi po yan yung responsible, Ang trabaho ng auditor is to provide reasonable assurance. Okay? Especially when we are talking of financial accounting, di ba? Audit of financial accounting, no? So hindi po si auditor yung gumagawa ng internal control. Siya yung taga-test para magkaroon tayo ng level of assurance, no? Number 2, reasonable assurance. Ano bang ibig sabihin ng reasonable assurance? The IC, ibig sabihin ng IC dito, internal control. So the internal control system should provide a reasonable assurance that the 4 broad objectives of internal control, yung kanina, are met in a cost-effective manner. Okay? Ibig sabihin, etong 4 na ito dapat na-meet natin in a cost-effective manner. Kailangan pa rin yung cost-effectiveness. Okay? Reasonable assurance, that is number 2. Pangatlo, methods of data processing. Yung internal control should achieve the 4 broad objectives regardless of the data processing method used. So regardless kung papaano yung method of data processing, dapat ma-achieve natin yung 4 broad objectives. Okay? Yun lamang po ang sinasabi nitong ating number 3 here. And number 4, due to limitations, no, there is a possibility of error. Kahit na ginawa na natin yung lahat, posible na merong makalusot pa rin ng mga pagkakamali. There could be circumventions, no? Merong nasi-circumvent. Ano ba ibig sabihin ng circumvention? Meron tayong ginagawa para manipulate at maiwasan natin yung mga controls na yon at makagawa pa rin tayo ng kalokohan. There is a possibility of management override of controls. Of course, di ba, yung management yung responsible for establishing internal controls, pero pwede nila itong i-override. Okay? Kung kasama sila sa management fraud, halimbawa. And due to changing conditions, pwedeng yung sinet natin na control sa ngayon ay maaaring hindi na effective dahil nagbabago yung panahon. Okay? So, ito po yung ating 4 modifying assumptions. I repeat, 4 modifying assumptions ito. Ito naman yung 4 broad objectives of internal controls. 4 din po sila. Okay? Now, let's talk about exposures and risks. Ano bang exposure? Ano ba yung risk? Okay? Of course, in the context of internal control pa rin tayo. When we talk of an exposure, ito yung absence or weakness of an internal control. Kung wala tayong internal control or mahina yung internal control, there is an exposure. And exposure to what? Exposure to risks. Okay, now yung risks natin dito, it can be a destruction of asset, it can be a theft of assets, it can be corruption of information or the information system, or it can be the disruption of the information system. Kaya po makikita ninyo dito sa ating illustration, this is your internal control shield. Okay, ito yung ating assets, ito yung ating pinapangalagaan. Okay? Etong mga bomba, ito yung mga risks natin. At nagkaroon tayo ng exposure dito sa mga risks kasi merong mga butas. Etong mga butas na ito yung ating exposures, either absence or weakness of internal control. And these risks arises because of undesirable events, no? Merong fraud, merong error, may mischief, or may access, no? So, ito po ang best na picture that depicts exposures and risks. Now, para maiwasan po natin ang mga yan, meron tayong tinatawag na preventive, detective, corrective internal control model or the PDC internal control model. Ang ibig lang po nitong sabihin na model na ito, para maiwasan natin yung mga undesirable events from happening, there should be preventive controls, detective controls, and corrective controls. Kagaya ng makikita po ninyo dito. Okay? Etong mga arrows na ito yung mga undesirable events. Etong preventive, detective, and corrective controls, they are the controls that should be in place para maiwasan natin, ma-minimize yung exposure sa mga risks dito sa mga undesirable events na ito. Now, let me discuss to you what is a preventive control. Ano ba ang objective ng preventive control? Ang objective nito, without even reading this one, is to prevent an exposure, prevent an undesirable event from happening, from entering the company. Because, basahin ko na po. Preventive controls are passive techniques designed to reduce the frequency, of occurrence of undesirable events. Ang target natin dito, kung hindi kayang i-eliminate, at least i-reduce. Okay? Ang occurrence, pangyayari nitong mga undesirable events. Preventive controls force compliance with prescribed or desired actions and thus screen out aberrant events. So kumbaga, filter nito, yung mga undesirable events from happening, from coming in. Those are preventive controls. Now, let's talk about detective controls. Without even reading this one, ang control na ito yung nagde-detect. Merong nakalusot, these detective controls detect this. Okay? It is a form of a second line of defense. These are devices, techniques, and procedures designed to identify and expose undesirable events that elude preventive controls. Ibig lang nito sabihin, ito yung nagde-detect kapag merong nakalusot sa preventive controls. Yun yung sinasabi na that elude preventive controls. Detective controls reveal specific types of errors by comparing actual occurrences to pre-established standards. Okay, so yan po detective controls. Now, ano naman ang corrective controls? Actually, medyo related po ang detective at corrective controls. And sometimes they go hand in hand. If you have a detective control, ano gagawin mo? I-detect mo lang. Of course, dapat meron niyang kapares. Yung corrective control, pag na-detect, i-correct na natin. Ayusin na natin siya. Ito yung corrective controls. These are the actions taken para i-reverse yung effect ng errors. Okay, that was detected in the previous step, no? There is an important distinction. Please take note of this distinction, no? Between detective controls and corrective controls. Kasi po, ang detective controls, they identify anomalies and draw attention to them. Samantalang yung corrective controls, they fix the problem. Ang taga-ayos ng problema, yung corrective controls. Ang detective controls, taga-identify ng anomaly. And when we are talking of anomaly, ito yung mga exceptions, no? Okay? So, please take note, no? These are your preventive, detective, corrective, internal control models, wherein we are just describing the three different layers, different types of controls. Okay, now, this is an excerpt from a separate video lecture sa aking auditing on a computerized information system environment. No, computerized audit or IT audit, kumbaga. Doon sa ating Sarbanes-Oxley Act, eto, recap lang kasi nabanggit ko na rin ito before. Meron tayong Section 302 and Section 404. Sa Section 302, 'di ba, sinasabi doon na yung corporate management required sila na mag-certify ng organization's control. Na dapat meron po, ito po ang aming mga controls. We certify that these are the controls. And sa Section 404, required po yung management na i-assess kung gumagana ba, kung epektibo ba yung internal controls. Okay? And of course, these are being provided sa pamamagitan ng pagpo-provide ng mga annual reports. Okay. Now, prior po dito sa Sarbanes-Oxley Act, meron na tayong tinatawag na COSO framework, which is a framework in establishing an internal control measure, internal control framework. Okay? A few years before this Sarbanes-Oxley Act, meron na po tayo ng COSO framework. Now, ito pong COSO framework, hindi ko na po i-explain sa inyo. Kasi po, meron akong separate na explanation na dito na nagawa in the past. So, I would like you to refer to this, COSO framework, or COSO internal control framework. Okay? Makikita po ninyo ito sa aking basic accounting playlist, pero ilalagay ko na rin po ito dito sa ating playlist sa accounting information system para lamang po hindi na ninyo ito makalimutan. Okay? So, reminder lang, the COSO framework or the Committee of Sponsoring Organization of the Tradeway Commission, that is your COSO. And this provides the framework for internal or for establishing internal control. Dito po ninyo ma-encounter yung COSO Cube, yung ating acronym na CRIME, Control Environment, ano-ano pa ba yan, At marami pa pong iba. That is only one, okay? But yung summary po nito is our CRIME na acronym. So please I will be referring you to this separate video lecture na ilalagay ko rin after this video lecture. Okay? So hanggang dito muna po tayo sa discussion on the internal control. Okay? So if you have any question dito sa ating napag-usapan on modifying assumptions, on the 4 broad objectives, on the exposures and risk, please let me know para ma-assist ko kayo. Until then, I will see you around, Bye-bye.